Welcome back to the Leadership Blueprint podcast. Today's guest is John Spiesman. John works with senior leaders and executives who build successful businesses but feel trapped inside them. His work focuses on helping leaders step out of the day-to-day chaos, reclaim their time, and create organizations that don't depend on their constant presence. What I appreciate about John's approach is that it's grounded in measurable change, not motivation, not theory, but real leadership shift that actually shows up in how a business runs. I'm excited for this conversation. Everyone, please welcome John Spiesman. John, your work centers on helping executives work on their business instead of inside their business. Was there a moment in your own career where you realized you were trapped inside your own machine that you built?
It's a great question. Yeah, certainly there are many times. And I think successful people are often successful because they're good at solving problems.
Hmm.
I'm an engineer by training, by schooling, and I am analytical. So sometimes problems can feel a little bit like catnip. Man, I can't get enough. I love it. And I can lose myself in those problems. So early on in my corporate career, one of the habits I had was I loved making myself indispensable.
Mm.
And luckily, it didn't take me too long to realize that if I was indispensable, I wasn't going anywhere. When I shifted my leadership into how do I grow my team so that I'm not only indispensable, but I'm not even needed anymore, then I was promoted into the next opportunity. And it was a game changer and changed my growth trajectory. So really, and in today's line of work, like I can still find myself in that problem. I work for myself, so I can kind of, if I'm getting lost in problems or trapped in something, it's because I created it. But I've done the same thing in my current line of work. I've chased opportunities for revenue that, ended up being work that I didn't really love. And I had to course correct. When things started to feel like a job, that's when I knew I had a problem.
Mm.
As long as I'm staying in the zone of work that I love and it feels more like a calling than a job, then that's a good spot to be. So, I think this is a problem everybody wrestles with to some extent or another, is that they can lose perspective and get caught up into the day-to-day and fall out of love with the business that they started.
100%. I am a bit curious if you went to school to become an engineer and that is your I guess first career, your profession. What led you into leadership, executive development, and consulting?
Yeah, that's a good question. I certainly didn't go into anything thinking about leadership. I got into engineering just out of curiosity and problem solving, but then found I really wasn't that probably great at engineering. I didn't enjoy the numbers as much as I enjoyed the people. And so that led me into a leadership career kind of accidentally. And then that leadership career, the company I worked for tended to want to constantly challenge you. So I was always being moved into roles and shifted into positions where I really was uncomfortable. I wasn't an expert. And so I had to start getting good at not solving problems for the team, but figuring out how to help other people solve problems. So indirectly, it helped me to adjust my leadership style closer to a coaching style of leadership, even though I didn't recognize it that way at the time. I was always kind of in a position of incompetence, but having responsibility or accountability for the performance of the team.
Mhm.
So I had to rely on the people that were there who knew the work. Fast forward until I retired from that corporate career, and I spent some time fruitlessly looking at other opportunities, not finding something that I really loved. And then my wife made an observation that kind of changed my thinking. She made an observation about the things the times that I would come home from work and want to talk about work. And what I learned, that insight helped me to understand that what I really loved was developing people, developing teams, and helping people to solve those problems. And that led me down a path of inquiry about how can I make a career out of this? And so that kind of led me into what I'm doing now, leadership, executive coaching.
Got you. Okay. Well, thank you for that insight. John, many leaders tie their identity to being indispensable. How do you help executives untangle their sense of self from their role inside of their business?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned earlier, I've been in that indispensable trap, so I To start with, I don't tell them they're wrong. We all like to feel indispensable. We all like to feel like we're useful. So I get that. Who doesn't want to feel that way? But the important thing is for them to get clear about what matters more. Does it matter more that they feel indispensable and useful, or does it matter more that their company is growing as quickly as it could grow? And as soon as the leader starts to realize that that's a binary choice. You can't have both. You can't be indispensable and the point person for every problem and have your company grow as fast as it could. And once they start to wrestle with that binary choice, then it starts to open their eyes to new possibilities and for them and their company to grow differently than what it has in the past.
How would you help somebody through that when they do feel indispensable? And they rather, I guess they're attaching their ego to being indispensable while their company is growing slowly, not slowly, but not at a rapid rate where it could be.
Yeah, usually I never have somebody call and say, "Hey, I have a problem with being indispensable," right? The pain point shows up differently. The pain point shows up that I'm not hitting the goals that I have. My growth is stagnated. The company growth is stagnated. Or they might say, "Hey, my team isn't stepping up the way I need them to step up." So they usually identify the problem somewhere else. And this indispensability or the leader's inability or unwillingness to let go is a secondary cause, right? They don't usually know it, or they would have done something about it, right? So what I do is help them to explore the problem and then get to a point of, sometimes this happens through their own insight. Sometimes it happens after I've maybe interviewed some of the people around them. We come up with data, we come up and say, "Hey, here's some indicators. Do you think that this is possibly part of the problem?" And then that usually opens the door, and then maybe they're open to another conversation, or maybe the problem, it could be not indispensability right now. They could have other problems that are more urgent, but it's really through exploration, curiosity, and trying to get under the hood and see what's going on that we surface a problem like that.
Gotcha. Thank you. Joe, in your experience, what's the most common leadership behavior that looks productive but is actually keeping companies stuck?
Yeah, I think that it's this 7 words right here. It's faster if I just do it. This is a devastating illusion that a lot of leaders have. And the reason it's devastating is because it's, number one, it's true. At some level, it's true. Yes, right now, it probably is faster if you go ahead and do it because you've done it 1,000 times, right? You're really good at it. Nobody can be probably as good as you are right now. So it is faster if you do it. But here's the trap, right? It doesn't allow, it doesn't allow your team to grow, right? And you're basically choosing to become the bottleneck for your own company, right? So you're choosing that thing that it's faster for you to do over things that are actually important for you to do, right? And you're not allowing somebody else who should be doing it to do it. So, I think that's one of those decisions that feels good, but it can actually lead to devastating issues down the road. So, you don't have to delegate everything, but if you find yourself using those 7 words very often, probably have opportunity to look at things a different way.
No, 100%. So if you think you're the best at whatever the task may be, like you said, it's probably true. However, no one else inside of that company can do those leadership activities that you can do, right? You're the CEO, you're in a leadership position for a reason. At some point in time, you are going to have to take a step back and give up some control so the company can grow. So you can actually focus, like what you said, John, on the CE leadership activities that no one else in the company can do. It doesn't matter if they can do it as well as you. It's the simple fact that they cannot do what you do, period. So I completely agree with that answer.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think sometimes people don't understand what are those things? What are those things that only I can do that I can't delegate, right? Versus the things that I can delegate, and making those time, the one thing the CEO can never get more of is time, right? So delegation, often they think of as, they're not thinking about this as an investment. If they thought about it in financial terms, that delegation is really time leverage
Yeah.
that you're creating, right? So if they think about delegation as increasing their time ROI, I think that decision would be so obvious, like almost every time. But there's a bunch of things that hold people back, whether, their perception of how delegation should happen, or maybe they have an experience, right? I give it away, then it comes back, you know, those things then become kind of that enabling or excuses that say, well, it didn't work out well last time. I don't need to do it this time. But if they took the emotion out of it and really looked at it as like a financial leverage creation tool, I think you'd see them do a lot more delegation regularly.
No, 100%. And on the matter of maybe they won't be as good as I when they first start, well, that's
Mhm.
okay because in the long term, you will get so much more of your time back. In the short term, sure, you have to dedicate more time and attention to training this individual on whatever task it may be. But 6 months, 12 months, 24 months down the road, the amount of time you would have saved because you gave up the first 3 months to train them, oh my gosh, it's like you said, the time ROI is massive there.
Yeah. One of the mental shifts that I sometimes help people to make, number one, is take them back to the beginning. Like, were you always this good at this thing?
Mm,
Right. And that's, oh, well, of course not. I made this mistake, that mistake, blah, blah, blah. And I said, so why do you expect them to be as good? Number one. Number two, the bar that I try to set is say, don't ask the question of whether they're as good as you at this. Ask, are they 70% as good? Because if they're 70% as good, then you should probably delegate it and work on getting them up to 80, 85, 90, 95. Maybe they'll never get to 100. Doesn't matter. Right. But if they're 70%, you're saving 70%. You're saving all this time and getting 70% of the performance. That's an investment anyone would make. And then if they're not at 70%, maybe you shouldn't delegate this, or maybe we're talking about the wrong person. Doesn't
exactly.
mean that you shouldn't delegate it. Maybe there's somebody else who can be at 70%.
No, 100%. And I think you don't know until you know, right? You have to give that person an opportunity to make mistakes,
Mm.
to grow. But there is a fine line between, okay, this person has great energy, they're a great team player, but unfortunately, they're lacking the skill in this one area. And that's life, that's business, that happens. But until you give that person a shot, you're never gonna know. You're always gonna shoot yourself in the foot and have the mindset of it's faster if I do it.
Yeah, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe it's faster if you do it all the time, and then it's always going to be faster if you do it.
Right.
Right? Yeah. No, delegation's a big one. Very, very common.
On a side note, I this is kind of a funny story, but a while back, I invested into a house cleaner. Talking about delegating or delegation. Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that is by far the best money I have ever spent. Is a freaking house cleaner. I come outside of my room or like my office or whatever, and I'm like, the entire house is clean, like laundry's put away, like that's the best delegation task I've ever gotten rid of. It was amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm the same way with yard work. Like, there was a
Mm.
time that I liked yard work, right? It was kind of yeah, almost, time away, kind of turn off the brain kind of thing. But then at some point, I'm like, what am I doing? Like, how much is this hour and a half worth? Right. And yeah, hire it out. So I think, it's a moving target, right? What you should delegate, what you can at any given time. I think it's always worth continuing to evaluate. But for CEOs and senior leaders, this should be something you're really striving to spend significant time doing as a part of your activities, is helping other people to take on more in your organization. As a leader, that's almost the definition. And if you're not building
Mm.
the capabilities of your team, you're not fulfilling your primary job description.
No, great talking point. I totally missed over that. But exactly, you are not doing your job as a leader if you are by definition not helping them grow. If you do everything for them, like you said, enable them, you're not being the best mentor, the best coach, the best leader that the organization is asking for. Great point.
Yeah.
Do kind of want to change direction here slightly. So
Okay.
John, you say real organizational change starts with courageous change at the senior leadership level. What kind of courage are most leaders missing today?
This could show up in different ways, but, kind of coming back to the delegation a little bit, letting go is one of the biggest things that takes courage and that people hesitate to do. Right. And some of that, because sometimes it can be, usually it's fear based, honestly. Right. Even though it may not feel that way initially, but letting go of things, number one, You have to step outside your comfort zone, right? If you're going to let go of something, then it opens up the possibility of what should I be doing? I was just working with a CEO on this very thing this year over the last month. We're talking about you need to let go of some of these things that you're doing, move further away from the customer is how we put it, and into your CEO job. And it immediately brings up like what? Like what now? What do I do now? If I'm not doing this, what am I supposed to be doing? Right. So it can trigger fear because of discomfort in stepping into what's something unfamiliar. And then it can open up this whole thing we were talking about with delegation of the other people aren't going to do it to the same standard I was doing it.
Mm.
Right. It's not going to get done the way it needs to get done. Right. Well, yeah, you're right. You should let go of that. Right. And letting go of that is hard because we have ownership. We have expectations. We may have set standards or expectations of customers or other people about how it should be done. And it might be hard for other people to step into that. So, but all of that has to happen. You have to let go of something if you're going to do something new. You can't just keep piling on yourself. So today, if you're operating as president and COO, you can't be the CEO. If you want to be the CEO, you can't just add CEO things to your plate. You have to let go of things and remove things before you can add things, right? So that's, I think it's difficult to do because it's change, and that's a human reaction to any kind of change.
No, for sure. And going back to maybe this new employee or maybe one of my employees, etc., cannot do the job as well as I. But not going back to, but what about extreme ownership? Like they should take ownership as a no, that's my fault they can't do it as well as I. I need to train them better. I need to devote more time, effort, energy into this rep, one might say, so they can get to the level of where I want them to be. And like you said, it is all about standards. As a leader, it's my job to enforce the standards. I'm not saying you have to be an asshole about it, but do it in a professional manner and let your staff know this is what is expected to get done. And if it's not like this, what can I do to help you get to this level? And I think, I don't know, maybe most leaders don't really understand that aspect, and hence why I started the podcast. But at the end of the day, it's your company, or you have some ownership within the company. If you're a C-level executive, enforce the standards. Do your part in helping your team get better. Right? It's always going to fall on you. If the company's growing, it's on you. If the company's decaying, it's on you. Take more ownership within the growth and within your employees.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and one that often it's easy to forget that, the bar for growth, the bar for performance in your company starts at the top, right?
Yes.
And I think performance is easier for people to internalize. They get the performance part, but the growth part is harder sometimes for people to internalize. So to say that same thing a different way, to say your company can't grow any faster than you as the CEO is growing. That's a harder one sometimes for people to understand because what that does is it sets the bar for how quickly growth is going to trickle down into your organization. So when I talked about courage being letting go, the CEO letting go of things that somebody else should and can do takes courage. It also triggers growth at the next level. And it triggers growth for you as the CEO because now you start spending your time with more strategic or building relationships or, those kinds of things that are new for you. So that growth cascade starts by the courage for you to let go of other things to your team, right? And that ownership to go ahead and define what does success look like and what do those standards need to be. Sometimes people say the standard is what the standard is today. That's not always the right answer. As a CEO, let me give you a direct example of somebody, CEO that I was working with that had stepped into a role, and they were because of an exit in the company, and they were doing the role at a level, right, super high level because they're very comfortable with it. And they said, and they went through trying to backfill it, and they were unsuccessful 2 times. The people would come in, the guy would be unhappy with them and would let them go. And we started digging into that. He was holding their performance to the standard of what he was able to do. And I said, is that realistic across the board? And we started talking about things like, you were able to make that decision unilaterally. Could this person who's replacing you make that decision unilaterally? And the answer is no.
Right.
That person would have to get approval. They would have to talk to other people. They would have to gather more information. They would have to come to the CEO to get that actual approval to do it, right? So the standard of performance that he was asking people to fulfill is not possible for them to fulfill, right? So now you got to redefine it and say, okay, what is that job? What are the standards? They might not be the same as when you're doing the job.
100%. And if it's not documented, like an SOP as an example,
Yeah.
how can you truly enforce certain behavior
Mm.
if there isn't even a standard operating procedure on how to get the dang job done? You know,
Right. Yeah.
it's hard to set an expectation and hold individuals accountable.
Yeah. You can't
And
hit a target you can't see.
exactly, exactly. John, quick question here. So you offer a results-based guarantee, which I love, by the way. You essentially offer measurable improvement or you don't get paid. Now, in your definition, what does measurable actually mean in leadership consulting?
Yeah. I mean, the thing when we're talking about leadership, it sometimes can be inherently hard to measure, right? But it can be, right? Because leadership, the only thing that matters about leadership is how it lands on other people. So the way we measure it is, and I'm sorry, I can go into way more detail, but the simple way is that you basically define who matters, who are the consumers of this leadership that we're working on, and then we survey them. We survey them before, during, and after, and we look for measurable improvement. We can measure quantitatively, right, their feedback of these leadership behaviors and whether they're changing over time.
Hmm.
And we can go into a lot more detail, but this has been used with, it's a well-documented process that's been used with thousands of CEOs and senior leaders in a variety of different industries. So that's the measurable piece. We try to take the squishy behavioral type of things and turn them into numbers. And those numbers tell a story. Like after seeing hundreds of these surveys and lots of data, yeah, I mean, there's clear trends. You can see, I can almost predict the scores, right, based on the behaviors that I see when I'm working with somebody.
That's pretty cool. I feel like whenever you do start working with an organization, John, you first have to get a baseline, right? So before you can improve anything, we have to measure exactly where we are now. So I guess I'm walking this out as if I were a leadership consultant. You would go around, you would interview everyone else, get a baseline for how the leader is currently operating. You would work with them for 60, 90, 120 days, and then essentially redo the assessment, gather scores from their colleagues, etc., and see how we improved over 3-4 months. Is that essentially kind of how that would work?
Yeah, that's pretty close. I usually think about it in like 6-month cycles,
6 months, that's
right?
probably more
Because
realistic, yeah.
there's two things that have to change when we're talking about leadership behaviors. The first thing that has to change is the actual behavior, right? So nothing changes if the actual behavior doesn't change. So if you say, I want to be a better listener, and you don't actually change any behaviors, nothing's going to change, right? But if you just change the behaviors, it's not enough. What you also have to change is people's perception of your behaviors.
Mm.
So they're aware, and that's a function of their awareness, right? And whether or not they actually see and feel the change, right? So the work that we're doing is not only to shift the actual behaviors. So if a behavioral scientist were looking at that leader, and seeing their actual behaviors, they might see the behavior change in month 2. But if you asked all the people, they'd say, oh, Joe still does, he just, he acts the same way, right? Because they either don't believe the change has happened, they aren't paying enough attention to see the small changes, so they don't notice it, right? Or they're just busy. People are just busy with 1,000 other things, and they're not always paying attention to everything everyone else is doing.
Exactly. They have a preconceived idea because
You
of the
got it.
months and years they spent with XYZ person over here. They're not going to notice an immediate change if I don't know,
You
Bill over
nailed it.
here, yeah, decides to change after one meeting. They're not going to
So
notice that.
So part of what you have to do is overcome that inertia so that people can actually see and understand the changes that have been happening. So it's really a 2-stage kind of a process, and the frameworks, the processes that I use are geared to address that human behavior. That's just how people work.
No, for sure. Do you mind giving us a high level overview of what that framework or method would be?
Yeah, I mean, it's so simple, it'll sound ridiculous, but essentially, rule number one, you have to be developing in public. So you have to tell people what it is you're working on. And it's also great if you give them a why. Like, why am I working on it? Like, what impact is that having on you and on the team today? And what am I trying to fix? What am I trying to fix and why? I use the wrong word, not fix. What am I trying to improve? So you tell them what it is up front. And then you tell them specifically, what behaviors am I targeting? So here's the ways in which you should see me acting different. So
Mm.
you need to put it in terms of, you can't just say, I'm going to be a better listener. You have to tell people what it means to you to be a better listener. You have to say, I'm going to hold my questions and not till the end so I don't interrupt people. You have to say, I'm going to practice positive body language, engaged body language. I'm going to maintain eye contact. I'm going to nod my head. you have to tell people what it should feel like. And then you have to re-engage them. I tell people to do it every month, at least. Come back to them and ask for feedback and suggestions.
Mm.
So when you do that, you're reminding them of your goal. So raising their awareness, you're genuinely asking for their feedback and for their suggestions. So you're engaging them. They're part of the process. They have now ownership over your development, right? And then you're trying to improve and get better and repeating that cycle of basically ask for feedback, thank them for the feedback, act on it if it's valid feedback, and then continue that improvement process. So it's just as simple as that. Tell people what you're going to do something, ask for feedback, improve. That's it.
Absolutely. On that note of working with clients in the framework, do you have any case studies or specific results that you can give to the audience and I?
Yeah, I mean, I have lots of different examples, but I'll just use one actually today. It's very timely because I had a conversation with a ex-coaching client today. We stopped working together about 18 months ago, 2 years ago. At the time, she was working for kind of a medium-sized company, about 50 million in revenue, and she was the chief experience officer. And we worked on some leadership behaviors. Some of the things we worked on was, finding your voice. How can you speak up, be a stronger leader, and speak into things that maybe weren't directly in your roles and responsibilities? So how do you contribute at a more executive level? And about healthy accountability. So we worked on that for a year. She was a great client, just fun to work with. She did really well, great measurable results, like I said. And then we stopped working together because I kind of shifted into working on an internal sales transformation that they were doing. But she just recently got promoted to president.
Wow.
And
Awesome.
she called me and said, hey, said some really kind things about our time together and about how some of those things helped her to have the confidence, I think, to get to where she's at, and for her leader to have the confidence, the owner of the company to have the confidence to promote her. But wanted to talk about how we might work together again with some of the new challenges that she's seeing. So those are some of the things that I love to see. Number one, I love to graduate people.
Mm.
I love to work on something, declare success, and then move on. Like, I don't want to work with you for 10 years. It's not to say it can't happen, but I don't feel like I'm doing my job if we're not constantly in high growth, high development mode. If we're not there, then I want to adjust things, or we need to maybe think about how to get back into that high ROI, high growth kind of mode. Seasons change. So sometimes you just don't have the room, right? You have to be focused on blocking and tackling or other things. So, but yeah, those are the kinds of stories I love. Other ones, I think I love the self-discovery type of a story. Like, one company that I was working with, the CEO came and said, hey, my team needs help. They're struggling to execute, and I think they need help with accountability.
Hmm.
And so, okay, let's talk. We met the team, started interviewing the team, making some observations, going to leadership team meetings and things like that. And really what we uncovered was that the CEO was a really, really high octane, very fast moving, kind of a idealistic, like idea guy. right? And so he was 1,000 miles an hour all the time. And what would happen is that he was extremely disruptive when they're trying to talk about routine execution of the business. He was moving the team left, right, left, right, left, right all the time. And the team was trying to respond to his leadership, but couldn't execute on anything because the direction would change so quickly. So, we shared those observations, and we shared some of the comments that came back from the team. And he had that realization of, oh, wow, yeah, I can identify with that. I know I'm that way, but I didn't realize how this was showing up and how this was hamstringing my team.
That's very interesting because I used to date a girl who went to a pretty well-known institute, and her lab professor, her PI to be exact, was that exact same way. Huge strategist, huge idealist, big picture thinker, just like me, right? And but every day, every single day, the idea was changing, and it was so hard for her and her lab mates to actually move the ball forward with anything because yesterday it's one thing, today it's another, the following day it's gonna be something entirely different. How can we make any progress if it's constantly changing, you know? So just wanted
Yeah.
to share my thoughts on that.
No, I mean, and this is a classic example where somebody's strengths, when they're carried too far, become a liability.
Mm.
Right. There's nothing wrong with this guy, right? This guy, that's a superpower, right? But the
Yes.
problem is if the superpower is turned up to volume 10 all the time, it's chaos, right? So what we had to do was, well, with that insight, right? What we did is said, okay, what's a leadership rhythm and routine to help your team know what's important and be able to execute? And then he actually had to step out of leading his own leadership team meetings. His CFO started leading the leadership team meetings, right? Which was growth for him. He had to I gotta sit on this idea right now. We had to find other outlets for his creativity and his ideas, not turn them off, but just find the right place and the right time for those, but stabilize for his team. And within 2 months, they started breaking EBITDA records for the month
Wow.
because they were able to follow through. They were able to align and follow through and execute on things. And that stability started to immediately cascade through the team, from the leadership team down into their teams and down to the people that were doing the work, right? So people could
That's amazing.
spend more time executing and less time adjusting to the change of the day.
That is such good insights. I mean, for me specifically, because I resonate a lot with the PI and the guy that had to take a back seat and let the CFO run the meetings. I am an extremely creative person. I wasn't always this way. I was like an athlete growing up, but in my early 20s, I really cultivated and I guess found myself, one might say, that I'm really creative. Like I have ideas at the wazoo, I feel like, hence why I'm an entrepreneur. But anyways, a different story for a different day. I do want to say I just resonate a lot with that CEO.
I hear you.
John, do you have any last minute or closing notes that you want to mention, or where can the people find you, my friend?
Yeah, the best place for people to find me, I'm out on LinkedIn regularly. I post out there on an ongoing basis, so you can get to know me a little bit and just like how I think and my philosophies about leadership and those things. LinkedIn's a good spot. My email's out there. You can reach me there. And then also I have a podcast. So I have a podcast it's a local podcast for Utah. I interview Utah leaders and entrepreneurs. And the idea there is to kind of uncover the business stories and the leadership challenges that otherwise go untold, right? Where often podcasts or media, right, is talking about these big companies, leaders in of like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or, those kinds of people. I can't relate to those people. Like there's nothing about my life that looks like Jeff Bezos. So, but I can relate to a lot of the people that I've worked with. Right. So I called the podcast Untold, the best kept secrets in Utah. And what I really love to do is just talk to leaders and hear those those experiences that they've had, because I think they're more relatable than some of the stuff we see out there. And I hope to inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs. When you see what other people have done, you can sometimes see yourself in them. And hopefully that leads people to have the courage to go ahead and try something maybe they wouldn't have tried before. So yeah, I'd love to connect with anybody who's interested in those kinds of stories. And if something looks interesting, if it's worth a conversation, I'm happy to have a conversation. I really believe that everyone can benefit from coaching. But I'm fully aware, like, I'm not for everybody. I can't coach everybody. But if I'd love to help you find somebody that can help you if I can do that. So,
Absolutely. Thank you, John. It was a pleasure having you. I'm definitely gonna have to listen back to this to get the full insights and the full significance of the podcast. And for audience, go ahead and tune into the John's podcast, Untold: The Best Kept Secrets in Utah. And I think it's pretty ironic that both of us actually reside here in Utah.
that's right. Yeah, man. We're going to have to get together and have lunch sometime.
Absolutely, the Beehive State. Audience, thanks for tuning in. And John, one more time, it was a pleasure having you. Thank you.
Great to be here. Thanks, Jordan.
Yes, sir.